Audio Jungle.
Hello, and welcome to Is This AI, where we humans on the Beamer AI Council aim to bring you a handful of myth-busting insights, a few practical ideas to take home, and perhaps a little more clarity for the AI road ahead. I'm Ollie Veysey, writer, filmmaker, and content strategist, and I'm here in my role as co-chair of Beamer's AI Council. This is Volume 2, which is very exciting after a brief break for the summer. We're back. I'm joined, as always, by digital sociologist and AI Council co-chair, Talia Moretti. Hello, Talia.
Hi, Ollie. Really nice to see you again. Very excited about episode 2.
And today we have our very first special guest, which is even more exciting. Emily Laws is a lead UX designer based in Bristol, dedicated to creating accessible and inclusive digital experiences. With a background in software engineering, she bridges the gap between design and development, which is really helpful for us today in our conversation. What we're going to talk about is very relevant. So she ensures that accessibility is at the heart of that process right from the start. Hello, Emily. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you so much. I didn't know I was your first special guest, so this
Very
is very
first.
exciting.
Yeah. So setting the standard. Fans of the show, and they are legion, know we kick off with a thought or provocation. So here it is. With current Gen AI tools, you can be fast or you can be good, but not both. Why not both? But I guess that's the question we're going to get into. Talia, I'm going to come right to you. Why are we talking about this? Why is it important? And what's your response to that?
Yeah, so this was actually a provocation that I brought to the council. So first, unpack it. So one of the things that I've been seeing a lot in my research is there's lots of claims, right, that these AI tools make. You know, some people say it can make us faster, more efficient, makes us more creative, more collaborative. And indeed, we have seen many of these positive things come from using these tools. But it did get me thinking a little bit about what do we lose, right? Like when we are using these different tools, because we know that if we're taking a really balanced approach to their strengths and weaknesses, they do have weaknesses too. So we know that if you're wanting to use GPT tools to write content, you've got to check them for facts and accuracy because, you know, they do sometimes hallucinate, right? And we've seen this in the case where some organizations like the Chicago Sun-Times, where a journalist working under huge amounts of time pressure landed up publishing an entire list of summer reads that mostly were made up by the tool, right? But he was under time pressure, didn't check it, trusted the tool. But we've also seen it with other things, you know, where we see developers using these tools to code, maybe not checking as much the code that they should, and starting to maybe forget, right? Some of these things that they used to know. And so they're having to do a lot more research. They're losing some of their coding skills, but it also does create tech debt. And then lastly, one of the kind of big examples that I've seen is, you know, things like your vibe coding. Remember vibe coding? It was like so hot right now for like two weeks before we moved on to agents. So vibe coding, one of the outproducts of that was Figma sites. And you could spin up a really quick website, right? Using vibe coding, great for prototyping, great for sharing ideas, giving people a really great visual sense of like what's in your head. But it falls short when it comes to things like accessibility. So these are some of the things we're gaining, but also some of the things we're losing, right, when we use these tools. And you know, I really wanted to bring Emily on the show, not only because she's a brilliant ex-colleague of mine who taught me so much about accessibility, but also because Emily has like first-hand experience using these tools and seeing their strengths and weaknesses and how to fill the gaps. So I'm actually going to hand straight over to you, Emily, to talk a little bit more about your experience with Figma sites.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Thanks for the introduction. Figma sites came about a few months ago. Figma, kind of as a entity, is a product design software. Effectively, it started off as, you know, a software to allow UX designers or product designers to produce prototypes. They've obviously grown and grown and grown, and it's become the standard tool that people use. And kind of moving into that, you know, growth, they have released lots of new products recently. One being, of course, Figma sites. You may have also heard Figma Make, which is another AI tool to basically use AI and vibe code, Figma Draw, that type of thing. But I'm going to be focusing on Figma sites because it's what I've sort of kind of investigated a lot in more detail. It's effectively a tool that can turn any design on the screen into a website. You don't need to code. You drag and drop. You can use templates. press a button, publish, and you get a website that you can look at your design and all its sort of production glory.
For the uninitiated, is that what vibe coding is? Like it's like a vibe.
Vibe coding is a word that's kind of come about. I think it stemmed about a year ago. Actively, you're feeling a certain way. You prompt an AI to code for you, and people turn into these vibe coders or prompt engineers where they can effectively say, I want this, and the AI does it for them. So you don't necessarily have to see the code. All in the vibes.
I just wanted to pause on the vibe for a second, but you were I interrupted you, and you've been working with that tool. How have you found that experience? What can you tell us about what you found? I know you've been writing about it and documenting your research.
Yeah, so obviously it came out a few months ago and I was straight on it. I'm going to try that out and, come with my own suspicions because all of these new tools, I like to basically stress test immediately for, are these going to help me produce accessible and good products? So the first time I sort of picked up Figma sites, I did the most simple website I could think of. I sort of used their template they gave me, dragged it into the, whiteboarding space. I added a heading, I added a few links and a big call to action button, something really, really familiar, a splash page or a homepage of a site I kind of put together and exported it. First thing I did, of course it's me, I right clicked and I looked at the code that it produced for me and I turned on my screen reader and I did all these things that I would do to kind of test for accessibility. Initially what I found was, every single kind of element on the page was the semantics were wrong. They were kind of meaningless to someone who potentially needs assistive technology to navigate. It was reading out just the wrong information into my ears when I had screen reader on. And I just sort of thought this is such a horrible experience for someone that's, looking at my website if I was to publish it and make it live and make people able to access. It was effectively what I like to call div soup, if anyone sort of knows how HTML and that type of thing works, just loads of divs everywhere. What I found kind of playing around was I'd missed it. There was a section for accessibility. It was in the right-hand side of the product. It was right at the bottom. It was sort of in a collapsible section. So accessibility was there. I wasn't told about it, but of course, spent the time looking into it. And there was a way to add tags, add semantics, how they call it. I tried that out. I then republished and tested and it made it worse. And it made it worse just through a bug.
Right.
And a lot of kind of initial, growing pains really with the product just made it harder. And it made me think, if I can struggle using this, how hard is this going to be for maybe just a, someone that doesn't know accessibility to see this, try something out thinking it's making a difference and improving it, and actually it's making it worse for the end user. So initially it was definitely not suited for purpose. It could produce something really quickly, even with a little bit of effort. I could play around with improving it, or it might make it worse, and I wasn't able to know which one, what would happen.
Wow.
Our audience will be most of them will be very familiar with the process of creating websites and other digital experiences. But could you just share with us very briefly what would be your, having spent however many years with your experience in craft, what would be your process normally that this is bypassing?
Yeah, so if I was coming into a new product, creating a new website, as obviously Figma Sites is trying to emulate, obviously that initial kind of thinking around, number one, who are my users and what their kind of variety of disabilities that my users may have, that is, generally it's everything potentially. So we have to think about ways that people may access our content, and understanding that helps us understand like what our product needs to do. So it needs to be able to be accessed by a keyboard. It needs to be able to be accessed by a screen reader, and different ways that people may use my product. So that's sort of a discovery step, right? I'd pick a tool that works and I know is going to be able to help me produce accessible websites. So, if I had the option, I would have picked Figma Sites. I would have picked something else that makes it easier for me. I'd do the design. I might even have something like a design system or something that's a reusable system that we've already tested, right? I know it's robust and it will work. So I'd pick, I guess, the right tooling to make sure it is accessible. go through the design process. As I go through, this is an ideal world, right? It doesn't always happen like this. We can't always get all this time to do this, but I would put it in front of people with different access needs, and I'd test it with them if it's going to be successful and meets their needs. As we go through development, obviously I'm continuously checking for accessibility. That would be using tools, manually checking, part of my QA process. And then finally, at the end, if I have the time, big audit, get some results and remediate those issues that I might find. So obviously that's a longer process. There's a lot of steps to that. But instead, what Figma sites can do is skip all of that, right? And just create me a website. And all those things haven't been considered in that process. And I'd be interested to know how Figma sites could fit into a full process. I think there's a space for it, but maybe it's not that end production space at the end.
Yes. Well, Figma, if you are watching, please come on next week's show. We would love to talk to you and learn about how you plan to develop this tool. You'd be most welcome, because we're all fans of Figma here. You mentioned a couple of times time, if you had the time, there's never enough time. Clearly, Figma Sites is trying to save everybody time, but what do you need as a design leader and guardian of accessibility in your process? What do you need this to do? Is it serving a need, or can you see where it could be useful?
I think it can be used just with a few additions and a few, like the ability, for example, to see almost an overview of all the accessibility stuff that's going on within that, within this site I'm creating. So what I mean by that is they've got like an ability to individually pick different components and focus on the small detail. But I think what I need out of that is a bigger picture, like, here's what Figma Sites thinks the accessibility of my site will be when I publish it, and just help it and me work together to produce something more accessible. And that might be through better documentation, tell me how to do it, or like better instructions at each stage. I think Figma Sites is really useful for early like iteration and ideas, right? I've got a site and I want to show it to my marketing team, or I want to show it to the product managers that are making decisions about this product, and we can get something really, really quickly in front of them. I'm not using it to publish and export out to real users because they're not necessarily going to have a great experience, but we can use it internally to do something really quickly. I will say, and I wanted to add this as well, since months ago, the Figma feedback came up and all this stuff about the sites. They have taken feedback. There's a Discord server where they're taking feedback, and they actually shifted to a full sort of few sprints of accessibility focus. And a lot of these initial bugs have been fixed. They're pulling in a lot more features for accessibility that I've seen in their like roadmap. So I'm really pleased that they are listening to us. I will say, I think there's more ways to go. And I think that education of the users is really important. If I'm coming in and I want to use Figma Sites, there is a disclaimer saying you're still going to have to do the work to make sure it's accessible at the end of the day. And maybe when you're publishing it, still go through that process to make sure it's good at the end of the day. You're doing it quickly, but you can get it good. We'll let you know how you can get there. I think that would be the most useful thing that they could do.
Yeah, I what you're saying around, that help, which is kind of recognizing what you're trying to achieve, recognizing this tool being able to see that what your priorities are and what you're trying to do, and then pointing towards things you might not have considered, or questions to things you could do, not trying to like take over the thinking part or doing it for you. Because I find that with my writing, I think sometimes giving your writing to another writer and asking them for notes is the worst thing you can do. Helping another writer is, because you don't need them to go, well, actually, you should just do it like this and give you different writing. You want someone who can go, I can see what you're trying to do here. Have you thought about this and this, to try and make a better version of what you're doing, not just another bit of writing, and I think that's my issue with some of the writing tools. Lisa, Talia, what do you think about all of that?
Yeah, so I think that disclaimer idea is a really brilliant one, Emily. And it makes me think actually of banking, like a mobile banking or a banking kind of design pattern that comes up. So do you know when you're making a payment to a new person, your bank always asks you, like, this is a new person, like, are you sure? Like, how did you get these contact details? Beware of scams. And so there's something in that, right, where you could have something similar, like on these new tools, like, hey, this is a brand new tool that we've just trialed. This is a beta. We could make that into a cool new design pattern that gives the people using this an idea around what the strengths are, where it is in the design process, and also what you need to watch out for. So, for Figma sites, they could have had something like, this is a really early stage tool. It's in its beta. We know that accessibility is really important. We haven't been able to build those features yet. The best use cases for beta right now are going to be for people with accessibility skills who can fill in the gaps, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be pretty good. And even if they said something like, for those who don't have accessibility skills, this is a great prototyping tool, right? Like bringing your ideas to life, making them really visual, giving it that real look and feel, right? As opposed to just paper prototypes or something that you've just pulled together very quickly in like something like Miro. But Emily, I do have a question for you. So if people want to learn more about accessibility, applying this to their sites, you've got a whole toolkit. I know you do, because you've shared it with me before, of different cool sites and apps and widgets and, that people can use. What tools out there are really beneficial for a designer who's wanting to make sure that they're producing something really accessible?
That's such a great question, Lisa. I get this question a lot, and it's definitely finding the right tools for the right kind of responsibility that you've got, or the thing you need to solve. There is a lot of information, and I think at the end of the day, an understanding of what accessibility is, who it affects, and what disabilities people may have that are trying to access your content. That's number one thing that a designer, let's say, will need to know is, how are people actually accessing my product? And it may be that they're not aware that, the way that people use certain assistive technologies means that they have to design in specific ways. So I will say, like, any awareness training or anything like that about how people use, there's so many people on YouTube that upload them using their own assistive tech experiences they have. I will say YouTube and videos and things like that, great tool. For designers specifically, I will link to Figma, right? Because Figma actually are bringing in little tools, like there's a color contrast checker, but I think, they're so minor. At the end of the day, it's a bigger picture, more holistic thing that accessibility sort of needs. There's a lot of plain English versions of the WCAG guidelines. There's a great new one that I've seen going around called AAA Aardvark. Would recommend that one. It's really, really useful. But for designers, it's getting it in front of people that have disabilities if you can. It's testing your own designs with, just using a keyboard, or make it black and white, or change the kind of visibility of your screen, the kind of width, different widths, text size, all this stuff. I'm sorry, I can't give you a specific tool because it really, really depends. But there's so many things that you can do.
This is brilliant, and perhaps we could gather some of those links off into the show notes, and any of the information we put out about the show, because I know people will appreciate them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, just to close on, because you've said something there, is like so many tools, but tools and knowledge, right? That's the powerful combination. Like tools and like the skills needed and the knowledge and the awareness needed to know a topic like this. This is what makes you fast and good, right? And doesn't make you just one or the other. And there's still so much, it's such a huge need still for expertise, specialist expertise, and not just pressing a button and just being fast.
Absolutely. I was wondering, listening to you, Emily, if we should, if the title of the show is, you can be fast or you can make it accessible. But I think you can be fast, you can be good. In this case, it's around accessible design, which is an essential part of the design process. But what you've said is actually relatable to any part of the process. And you just summed it up there perfectly, Lisa, Talia, around that knowledge and craft. I'll leave it with you. Emily, do you have any last thought you want to share on this? And then Lisa, over to you to close.
I think that's all really summed up great. I'm here and I'm very passionate about accessibility, and this is why it's sort of the topic of how I'm talking. But I completely agree that good accessibility is good, but so is good code is good, and good design that's contextual and it solves the user's problem is good. And all of these things, if you're very, very fast, you're not going to get that. So obviously just accessibility we can sort of talk about, but absolutely this extends to anybody's kind of responsibility. I think there still needs that human aspect in it to make it good at the end of the day.
I love that. I don't think I need any final words other than what I said earlier and what Emily's just shared. And if you loved this episode, please come back for more, because we're going to be talking much more about these kinds of topics and have many more people like Emily on the show. Thanks for hosting again, Ollie, and great to have you, Emily.
Thank you both. Thanks for being our first guest, Emily.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.